0317 local time. A line of whitecaps runs across the Timor Sea like someone raked their fingers through the water. Over the horizon, far beyond anything a beachgoer would notice, something metallic cuts the surface and vanishes again. Nobody on the shore sees it, but deep in the red center, an over-the-horizon radar hears the sky hum and whispers. Servers spin in hermetically cooled rooms near Alice Springs. Spaceborne eyes blink from far above, and a Wedgetail crew tighten harnesses as their jet taxis in the dark. The continent doesn't blink, it wakes. Welcome back to MilitaryHub. Today, we're not asking whether anyone would be reckless enough to invade Australia. We're asking what the country actually does the instant someone tries. The short answer is that Australia grows teeth in layers. The longer answer takes a mug of something and the acceptance that physics, geography, and a very prickly defense posture have conspired to make the North one of the worst places on Earth to arrive uninvited. Start with the map. Australia is a single vast island with no land borders, a population that clings to the coasts, and an interior that looks empty until it decides to kill your logistics. The northern approaches, the Arafura and Timor Seas, Torres Strait, and the necklace of Indonesian archipelagos are not open highways. They are narrow, shallow, sensor-soaked corridors watched from thousands of kilometers away. An invader has to cross ocean, thread straits, and then fight time, distance, heat, and a defense force designed to detect early, strike far, and keep the fight well away from cities. The philosophy is blunt. See first, hit first, deny entry, and let the environment finish what the missiles start. The early warning web is the quiet hero. The Jindalee Operational Radar Network bounces radio waves off the ionosphere to paint moving metal far beyond the horizon, turning the upper atmosphere into a trampoline and the sea into a drum. Space and signals intelligence flowing through Pine Gap deepen the picture. Infrared missile warning satellites watch for heat and betrayal. When a threat coalesces into shape instead of noise, Wedgetail crews take the conductor's podium, tankers spool up to give the Air Force stamina, and the country slides almost casually from peacetime watch to the unhurried choreography of mobilization. Doctrine follows geography. The Australian Defence Force doesn't try to be everywhere at once, because that would be a good way to be thin everywhere at once. It prefers to shape the approaches, break momentum at distance, and then either prevent a landing altogether, or if a lodgement slips through, starve it in place until it withers. That means the first punches usually come from the air. F-35As slip along the edges of radar cones, hoovering up targets and feeding coordinates to everyone else. EA-18G Growlers follow with electromagnetic malice, reducing hostile sensors to expensive sculpture. Super Hornets tote the heavy ordnance, LRASM for ships, JASSM-ER for infrastructure, and turn "we're assembling near this island" into "we regret to inform you your assembly has been cancelled." Above them all, the Wedgetail's radar sweeps like a metronome as it stitches aircraft, ships, and ground batteries into one moving diagram. Tankers trail their hoses like intravenous lines, giving the air war its endurance. While the Air Force stalks and scythes, the Navy plays bouncer. Hobart-class destroyers push an air defense umbrella out for hundreds of kilometers, and, with land attack missiles aboard, can turn a distant airfield or radar into a smoking absence at need. ANZAC-class frigates, upgraded with modern sea-skimming missiles, become nimble knife fighters that clip and fade rather than trade broadsides. Beneath the waves, the Collins-class submarines wait in the places every convoy commander fears. The bends in the corridor where turn radiuses reveal sonars, where patience is more deadly than speed. Their job isn't always to sink the first target they can track. Sometimes their job is more elegant. Force a fleet to slow down. Slow fleets get killed from the air. On land, the Army has learned to reach further than the shoreline. Long-range rockets roll north in convoys and by airlift, and those launchers may be few in number, but are rich in consequences. The moment a strait falls within their envelope, a commander planning to surge a landing force now has to plan to survive a traffic cone made of fire laid across his lane. Air defense units throw tight protective bubbles around the ports and airfields that actually matter. Amphibious troops aboard big-deck ships become the hand that can suddenly appear behind a lodgement. The surprise that turns an invader's map into a list of blocked roads, empty fuel bowsers, and urgent requests for helicopters that aren't coming. Threaded through the north, almost invisible until they want to be seen, are the Regional Force Surveillance Units, Norforce, the Pilbara Regiment, and the 51st Far North Queensland Regiment, who know every track, every water point, and every lie the landscape tells strangers. They read tire marks like signatures and navigate by landmarks that don't appear on tourist maps. In that country, invisibility is a local's privilege. Strangers don't get it for free. None of this means logistics have been tamed. Fuel and distance are Australia's inseparable gremlins. The difference in this era is that the gremlins are acknowledged at the start. Northern bases harden their skins and deepen their tanks. Runways that once looked comfortable become merely one option among many as dispersal airstrips multiply and aircraft practice living like nomads. COCOS, Keeling, grows more capable as a lookout station, a place to push maritime patrol aircraft deep into the lanes where submarines whisper. When allies begin arriving, and in any serious crisis they do, the pipeline across the Pacific and Indian Oceans thickens with tankers and sea lift, while Australia concentrates on the lanes that matter most. So what does it look like when someone actually tries to push through? The first hours are all about turning ambiguity into a target list. The ionosphere chatters with radar echoes. A Wedgetail turns lazy circles well south of trouble, while refueling hoses shiver between tankers and fighters. P-8, a Poseidons tramp out into the gaps and seed the sea with listening buoys that turn the water column into a geometry problem. On the ground, base commanders run checklists that seem boring in peacetime and life-saving when it's windy. Disperse jets, move munitions, spin up generators, update decoys, recheck camouflage, and run one more drill. In Canberra, phones that are never allowed to be off the hook begin to ring without anyone dialing. Allies have already seen the same picture. When the first blows land, they do not look like a neat set-piece battle from a recruiting poster. They look like subtlety followed by humiliation. A radar ashore turns aside for a moment, wondering why a lobe of the sky went quiet, just as a pair of F-35s draw a scalpel across it. A ship escorting an amphibious group realizes too late that the horizon is hiding sea-skimming missiles whose guiding brains were never supposed to see through that clutter. A convoy that expected to make 15 knots decides that, given the submarine threat, 8 is healthier. A submarine captain who dreamt of cutting into supply lines becomes very busy avoiding sonobuoys that appear like polka dots on his plot. None of those events end the day. They end the plan the day depends on. By the second day, the denial cage is closing. The Army's long-range rockets shape where ships dare to turn. Air warfare destroyers keep a corridor open for Australian and Allied aircraft to flow. Frigates lurk in angles few would expect them to use. The task force commander's whiteboard develops a rash of red circles labeled fuel, because every hour in the approaches brings a fleet closer to going tactical on its reserves. Nobody sensible wants to launch landing craft when the rescue plan for those landing craft is hope. Now imagine that hubris or luck still sneaks a lodgment ashore. It will not be on Bondi. It will be in a remote stretch with a gracious name and very little shade, where the first enemy the invader meets is not the Australian Army but the climate. The surveillance units watch without blinking. The amphibious battalion rides south on the back of a big deck ship and comes ashore, where it can strangle roads and seize the nearest strip that still has fuel. Fighters make the sky feel heavy. Drones that once seemed cheap and cheerful begin to die against layered short-range air defense and electronic warfare. Every resupply becomes a miniature invasion attempt in itself, with all the ceremony and none of the novelty. The invader's most reliable recruiter becomes heatstroke. All of this happens while the diplomatic machinery spins with an efficiency that doesn't make headlines until it does. Australia is an alliance animal by culture and architecture. Air crews from partner nations step into familiar briefing rooms as if they were home. Maritime patrol aircraft from friends expand the grid that hunts submarines. Logistics ships build the bridge no single nation can throw alone. None of this means others will fight Australia's war for it. It means the adversary finds themselves trying to fight a network, and networks are bad at dying all at once. By the end of Part 1, the lesson should be uncomfortable for anyone who thought the sea-air gap was an outdated phrase. Distance isn't an obstacle for Australia. It's a weapon it shares generously with the weather. The Defence Force's job is to force an invader to carry that weapon for them, in their fuel tanks and their calendars. The country sees early, hits far, and makes every landing a starvation experiment. To understand why the first day decides the 10th, Picture the approaches as a string of turnstiles rather than a hallway. Lombok and Umbai offer deep water and temptation to submarines. Arafura and Torres offer shallow water and nightmare to anyone who thinks big fleets turn easily in narrow places. Australia doesn't try to block every turnstile with a shoulder. It puts an elbow into the right ones. Submarines idle where a convoy must pass, content to force zigzags that make schedules useless. Rocket batteries unfold on stretches of coast where geometry turns sea space into artillery range. Unmanned sensors and, in extremis, mines turn unknown patches into rumors. And rumors are as good as minefields when your escorts are already nervous. Air dominance here is a network, not a nose count. The stealth fighters are the whisperers, the electronic attack jets are the hecklers, and the strike aircraft are the ones who bring an argument in 450-kilogram increments. The airborne battle managers provide the view from nowhere and everywhere. Tankers provide time. The point is not to be invincible. The point is to make the task force feel like every direction is the wrong one. You know the air war is going well when the enemy never quite discovers where your fighters sleep because your fighters have learned not to sleep in the same place twice. Maritime strike works on similar logic. You don't win by driving a frigate into a knife fight against an entire screen and hoping for a movie ending. You win by cutting tendons you can reach. Long-range anti-ship missiles go hunting for the escorts that keep the landing ships honest, while land attack weapons find the radars, fuel farms, and runways that let the enemy feel comfortable leaving home. When those go away or become unreliable, every other part of the plan starts arriving late, and late is how convoys die. Defending the bases that make all this possible is as essential as swinging for the fences. Air defense in the north turns into layers. Fighters overhead to pare back raids before they become salvos. Ships offshore to extend the umbrella and SWAT leakers. Ground systems around the places that actually matter. Fuel, munitions, power, runways to catch what gets through. Perfection isn't on the menu. Survivability and continuity are. Close a runway for hours and aircraft move elsewhere. Hit a tank farm and fuel flows from the next. Every time the lights come back on quickly, an adversary has to spend more to achieve the same temporary darkness. The amphibious ships deserve a paragraph of their own because they change where a fight happens. A Canberra-class LHD is not a vanity cruise liner with military decals. It is a switch. Load a battalion, their vehicles, their logistics, and their helicopters. And you can decide whether to land behind a lodgement to cut its arteries, to seize a useful strip before the other side can ruin it, or to lift civilians out while quietly pushing artillery ashore somewhere awkward. The ship is a promise that Australia can be inconvenient in more places than a map suggests. Then there are the Watchers. Ask people who have patrolled with Norforce, and you hear the same stories. The country looks empty until you try to hide in it. Then it becomes loud with small clues. Tracks read like signatures. Tin sheds become landmarks. A water point, invisible on maps, is known by 3 names and the habits of the birds that visit it. Those skills matter because invaders rely on the terrain being neutral. In the north, the terrain has opinions, and the surveillance units are fluent in them. Honesty check. Fuel and distance never stop being problems. The trick is to make them just as bad for the invader. Australia disperses what it can and hardens what it must. Allies plug in their own pipelines and lift. Aircraft learn to be comfortable with austere strips and long hoses. The invader's fuel, by contrast, lives on boats that must move in narrow places under watch, and every extra knot of caution is an hour drained from a schedule that already assumed optimistic weather. If this all sounds like a ritualized dance, that's because after the first week, campaigns turn into rhythm. Air squadrons rotate like breathing. Ships pass each other as one heads north to cover, while another slides south to rearm. Rocket batteries appear where yesterday there was only dust. Allied patrol aircraft paint the ocean with sonar like a pointillist painting. The picture only appears when you step back and see how many dots there are. Information operations slide into the foreground. Grainy clips of landing craft trying to crab their way back off a falling tide become memes, and the world moves on a little faster than the invader would like. Critics sometimes wave a hand and say, Australia is too big to defend. They have a point and miss the point. You cannot garrison a continent. You can, however, defend approaches, bases, and options so effectively that crossing the threshold becomes a career-ending decision. Others ask whether a superpower couldn't simply apply overwhelming force and be done with it. Superpowers can count. They know what it costs to donate ships and aircraft to the Museum of Maritime Hubris, especially when alliances mean their opponents won't be alone in the places that count. There is a faith in cyber wizardry these days too, as if a keyboard could permanently close a runway. Cyber hurts. So do missiles. The side that wins is the one that fixes holes faster than the other can make them, and Australia spends most of its time practicing repairs while holding on to enough offensive capacity to make the other side's fixes futile. What about the idea of landing somewhere empty and using isolation as protection? The emptiness is why the plan fails. Heat, dust, and distance are not a backdrop. They are opposition. If you truck fuel and water to a desert footprint under an angry sky and a watchful set of patrols, you quickly discover that you haven't seized ground. You have adopted a very expensive pet with a diet problem. Every leader must cross water under surveillance. Every resupply is a miniature replay of the invasion itself. Every casualty evacuation becomes a strategic argument. If the enemy's plan is live off the land replies with a dry laugh. The quiet, slightly ridiculous truth is that even the wildlife seems to be on the defense plan. Kangaroos refuse to be bribed, emus don't negotiate, magpies conduct seasonal air-to-ground strikes that have humbled better helmets than yours. If a landing craft could feel embarrassment, it would feel it being chased by a bird with no sense of rank. Call it Australia's unofficial psychological operations branch. The talons are tiny, but the memes are devastating. The timeline of a serious attempt starts to read like a checklist, even if nobody calls it that. Detection rides, microwave bounces, and satellite feeds into a picture that's hard to argue with. Decision follows, measured but fast, because muscle memory has been built across years of exercises. Degradation is the word planners prefer to destruction. Peel away sensors, pluck out escorts, put holes in the pieces that hold a plan together. Denial is where the sea-air gap earns its capital letters. Long-range fires, submarines, maritime patrols, and air superiority conspire to make the approaches feel like a maze that changes as you walk through it. Defeat can be dramatic or quiet. A landing collapses under starvation. A fleet decides that discretion is the better part of preservation. A government far away realizes it has begun to bleed credibility and steel and stops the hemorrhage by calling it a probing operation that met its objectives. Deterrence is restored the moment the cost becomes a cautionary tale. The craziest part is that the best defense remains the part nobody sees. The way choices made years earlier about base upgrades, missile stocks, alliances, and doctrine turn into friction at the right moments. Australia doesn't promise invulnerability. It promises the invader that the best day of their campaign will be the one before they left port. And if none of that persuades them, the magpies stand by. Australia's defense is not a wall, it's a moving maze. It punishes speed with distance, punishes mass with exposure, and punishes persistence with attrition and friends. There is nothing mystical about it. It is geography turned into tactics, alliances turned into logistics, and technology turned into time bought at the right moment. If someone insists on invading, they are welcome to try. The continent will see them, the air will reach them, the sea will slow them, the ground will exhaust them, and the plan that looked so clean on a map will dissolve in heat and kilometers. That's the point. That's why it's crazy to try.